The silence in the courtroom was deafening as she stood before Judge Morrison, her military decorations catching the fluorescent light. His dismissive smirk said everything about what he thought of her testimony. "Another fake veteran looking for sympathy," he muttered, loud enough for the gallery to hear. The snickers that followed cut through the air like knives. She remained perfectly still, her face betraying nothing. Then, without breaking eye contact, she reached down and began unfastening something no one expected. The metallic click echoed through the suddenly silent room, and even Judge Morrison's arrogance couldn't survive what happened next. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about courage, truth, and the moment justice finally arrives, consider subscribing to our channel for more incredible tales. The morning of March 12, 2024, started like any other for Staff Sergeant Lyrelei Drackthorne, but it would end with a moment that would be replayed on news channels across the country and change military contractor accountability forever. Lyrelei's alarm went off at 5:30 hours, exactly as it had for the past 15 years of military service. Old habits die hard, even when you're medically retired and facing the biggest legal battle of your life. She lay in bed for exactly 30 seconds, listening to the familiar silence of her small apartment in Aurora, Colorado, before swinging her legs over the edge of the mattress. The routine that followed was practiced, methodical and invisible to most of the world. Elena reached into the drawer of her nightstand and withdrew what looked like a standard athletic sock. To anyone watching, it would seem unremarkable. But this wasn't just any sock. It was a specialized liner designed to interface between scarred skin and advanced prosthetics, a piece of technology that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She rolled the liner carefully over the scarred stump of her left leg, checking for any signs of pressure points or irritation that could make the day unbearable. The process took exactly 4 minutes, the same amount of time it had taken every day for the past 5 years since she'd learned to do it properly. Next came the prosthetic itself, a masterpiece of carbon fiber and titanium engineering that represented the cutting edge of military medical technology. As Lyrelei attached it to her leg, the soft clicking sounds of the mechanical locks engaging echoed through her quiet apartment. These were the sounds that would later echo through a federal courtroom and change everything. Staff Sergeant Lyrelei Drackthorne limped slightly as she entered the marble corridors of the federal courthouse in downtown Denver 3 hours later. The morning sun streamed through tall arched windows that rose nearly 3 stories high, their glass surfaces so perfectly clean they seemed to disappear entirely, creating the illusion that the building was open to the Colorado sky. The light cast long geometric shadows across polished marble floors that had been installed during the building's construction in 1916, each piece of stone selected specifically for its ability to amplify sound and create an atmosphere of gravitas. Lyrelei moved differently than the hurried attorneys and court personnel rushing past her, their footsteps creating a symphony of urgency that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Her gait was measured, deliberate, each step calculated to minimize the slight mechanical noise her prosthetic made when it contacted the hard floor. To most observers, her walk appeared completely normal, perhaps just slightly more careful than average. But to those who knew what to look for, other amputees, medical professionals, or anyone familiar with advanced prosthetics, the subtle signs were there. The weight distribution was minutely different. Her left foot landed with a precision that biological feet rarely achieved, the result of sophisticated mechanical engineering rather than natural balance. When she paused to check the electronic court docket, she shifted her weight almost imperceptibly to her right leg, an accommodation so automatic she no longer consciously realized she was doing it. But here's where the story gets interesting, and why what happened in that courtroom 3 hours later would shock even the most experienced legal observers. Elena wasn't just another veteran seeking compensation for injuries sustained in service. She was carrying a secret that even her own attorney didn't fully understand. A secret that would transform a routine civil lawsuit into a moment of national reckoning with how we treat those who serve our country. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her dress blues were immaculate, every ribbon and medal positioned with military precision. Yet she walked through the crowd virtually invisible, just another face in the sea of people seeking justice. Now you might be wondering how a case like this could have taken 3 years to reach trial. The answer reveals something disturbing about how military contractor accountability works in America. Vanguard Defense Systems hadn't just sold defective body armor to the United States military. They had created an intricate web of legal protections, corporate shell companies, and political connections designed to shield them from exactly this kind of lawsuit. The case had been building for 3 years, each month revealing new layers of corporate negligence and deliberate cover-ups. Vanguard Defense Systems, the private military contractor, had been accused of knowingly manufacturing and shipping defective body armor to Iraq and Afghanistan between 2017 and 2019. The numbers were staggering and heartbreaking. 17 service members had died, 43 more had been wounded, when their supposedly bulletproof vests failed catastrophically under enemy fire. But the human cost went far beyond statistics. Behind each number was a family destroyed, a future erased, a set of dreams that would never be fulfilled. Private First Class Corvine Thalessar, age 19, from San Antonio, Texas, who had planned to use his GI benefits to become a teacher. Staff Sergeant Zephyria Kalos, 28, a single mother whose daughter would never remember her voice. Lieutenant Selam Ravencrest, 24, who had been 3 weeks away from rotating home to marry his high school sweetheart. Lyra Lai was one of the survivors, though the term survivor felt inadequate for what she had endured. The word suggested someone who had simply lived through a traumatic event. But Lyra Lai's survival had required a daily act of will, a continuous choice to keep fighting, keep adapting, keep moving forward, despite losses that went far beyond the physical. What the court documents didn't capture, what the medical records failed to convey, was the complexity of surviving catastrophic injury in a war zone. Lyra Lai's survival hadn't been guaranteed by reaching a medical facility or even completing successful surgeries. It had been earned through months of decisions. Deciding to trust prosthetic fitters, deciding to endure painful physical therapy sessions, deciding to learn to walk again rather than accept a wheelchair, deciding to testify rather than disappear into comfortable anonymity. But let me tell you what really happened on March 15, 2019, outside Kandahar, Afghanistan. Because what you're about to hear explains why Lyra Lai was willing to do something so dramatic, so personal, so potentially humiliating in front of a packed federal courtroom, and why that moment changed not just her life, but the entire system of military contractor accountability in America. "Excuse me, are you Lyra Lai Drackthorne?" A young court reporter approached, tablet in hand. "I'm supposed to escort you to the witness preparation room." Lyra Lai nodded. "That's me." As they walked, the reporter glanced at Lyra Lai's slight limp. "First time testifying?" "No," Lyra Lai replied simply. She had testified twice before in preliminary hearings, each time facing defense attorneys who questioned everything from her memory to her motivations. Today would be different. Today, Judge Bramwell Aldrichson was presiding. Aldrichson's reputation preceded him like a storm cloud. Known for his theatrical courtroom manner and particular disdain for what he called military theatrics, he had dismissed veteran testimony in 3 previous cases involving military contractors. His favorite phrase, repeated often enough to become courthouse legend, was that he wouldn't be swayed by uniform worship and medal polishing. The witness preparation room was small and windowless, furnished with standard government furniture that had seen better decades. Lyra Lai sat across from prosecutor Serafina Blackthorne, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 40s who had built her career on corporate accountability cases. "Are you ready for this?" Blackthorne asked, studying Lyra Lai's file. "Aldrichson is going to try to rattle you. He'll question your credentials, your memory, maybe even suggest you're exaggerating for financial gain." Lyra Lai's jaw tightened slightly. "Let him try." Blackthorne leaned forward. "Lyra Lai, I need you to understand something. Your testimony is crucial, but Aldrichson has already made comments in chambers about supposed veterans looking for payouts. He's going to come at you hard." "I've faced worse than an angry judge," Lyra Lai replied, her voice steady. What Blackthorne didn't know, what Lorelei had never told anyone outside her immediate family, was the extent of what she had lost in that IED explosion outside Kandahar. The official reports listed her injuries as severe lower extremity trauma with successful reconstruction. The reality was far more complex, far more personal. An hour later, Lorelei sat in the gallery as opening statements began. The courtroom was packed with journalists, veteran advocates, and families of those killed by the defective armour. Across the aisle, Vanguard's legal team had assembled an impressive array of expensive suits and confident smiles. Judge Aldrichson entered with theatrical flourish, his black robes flowing as he took the bench. At 58, he had the bearing of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his manner imperious. "This court is now in session," he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. His eyes swept the gallery and paused on the section where several veterans sat in dress uniforms. A slight frown crossed his features. "Before we begin," Aldrichson announced, "I want to make clear that this courtroom will not be turned into a theatre of emotions. We deal in facts here, not sob stories or patriotic displays." Prosecutor Blackthorne rose for her opening statement, outlining the case methodically. 17 dead service members. Defective armour that failed catastrophically. Internal emails showing Vanguard executives knew about the defects but shipped the equipment anyway to meet contract deadlines. When she mentioned Lorelei's name, Aldrichson's attention sharpened. Staff Sergeant Drackthorne will testify about the specific incident that nearly cost her life and did cost the lives of 3 of her teammates. Defense attorney Zirion Grimwald stood for his opening, immediately challenging Lorelei's credibility before she had even taken the stand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will hear from someone claiming to be a decorated veteran, claiming to have suffered grievous injuries. But claims are not facts. We will show that the supposed defects in this armour were actually the result of unprecedented explosive force that no armour could have withstood." Aldrichson nodded approvingly at Grimwald's approach, already signalling his bias to anyone paying attention. When court recessed for lunch, Lorelei walked alone to a small park across from the courthouse. She found a bench beneath an oak tree and sat carefully, her left leg extended slightly in a way that eased the pressure on her prosthetic. The phantom pain had been particularly bad that morning, a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Cassandra. "Mom, saw the news coverage. You don't have to do this if it's too hard." Lorelei typed back, "It's not about me, Mija. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." But even as she sent the message, Lorelei wondered if she was strong enough for what was coming. Aldrichson's reputation suggested he would attack not just her testimony, but her character, her service, her very right to be in that courtroom. At 2 p.m, Lorelei was called to the stand. The courtroom fell quiet as she walked forward, her slight limp more pronounced under the stress. She placed her left hand on the Bible and raised her right, swearing to tell the truth. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," the clerk requested. "Staff Sergeant Lorelei Drackthorne, United States Army, currently on medical retirement." Judge Aldrichson immediately interjected. "Staff Sergeant? Are you currently serving?" "No, Your Honour. I'm medically retired." "Then perhaps you should identify yourself as Miss Drackthorne," Aldrichson said with a thin smile. "Military titles are for active personnel." Blackthorne objected. "Your Honour, it's standard practice for retired military personnel to use their rank." "In this courtroom we use civilian titles unless the witness is active duty," Aldrichson ruled. "Continue, Miss Drackthorne." Lorelei felt the slight sting of the correction, but kept her expression neutral. She had expected this kind of treatment. Prosecutor Blackthorne began her direct examination. "Miss Drackthorne, could you tell the jury about your military service?" "I served 8 years in the Army, including 3 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. I was a combat medic assigned to the 1st Infantry Division. And on March 15, 2019, what happened to your unit?" Lorelei took a steady breath. "We were on patrol outside Kandahar when our convoy was hit by an IED. The explosion was massive, but our body armour was supposed to protect us from the shrapnel and secondary explosions." "What happened to you specifically?" "I was thrown from the vehicle. The blast sent metal fragments and debris in all directions. My body armor failed catastrophically. Instead of dispersing the impact, it cracked and allowed shrapnel to penetrate. Judge Aldrichson leaned forward. Ms. Drackthorne, how can you be certain the armor failed? Isn't it possible that any armor would have been insufficient against such an explosion? Lorelei turned to face him directly. Your Honor, I've been in 3 previous IED attacks. I know what properly functioning body armor feels like when it takes impact. This was different. That's hardly scientific evidence, Aldrichson replied dismissively. Blackthorne redirected. Lorelei, what injuries did you sustain? Lorelei's voice remained steady. Severe trauma to my left leg, internal bleeding, second-degree burns, and multiple shrapnel wounds. I spent 7 months in military hospitals. And the outcome of those injuries? Lorelei paused. This was the moment she had been dreading. I lost my left leg below the knee. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Some jurors shifted in their seats, but Lorelei noticed Judge Aldrichson's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked skeptical. Defense attorney Grimwald rose for cross-examination, his approach immediately aggressive. Ms. Drackthorne, you're seeking substantial financial compensation in this case, correct? I'm seeking accountability for the deaths of my teammates. But you would financially benefit if the jury finds in your favor? Any compensation would go toward medical expenses and adaptive equipment. Grimwald paced in front of the jury box. Ms. Drackthorne, you claim to have lost your leg in this incident, but you walked into this courtroom today. You're standing at that podium right now. Isn't it possible you're exaggerating the extent of your injuries? Lorelei felt her jaw clench. I'm wearing a prosthetic. So you claim, Grimwald replied, but we have no medical records that definitively prove amputation occurred. Blackthorne shot to her feet. Objection! The medical records are part of the evidence package. Records can be falsified, Grimwald continued. Your Honor, I submit that this witness may be perpetrating a fraud on this court. Judge Aldrichson nodded thoughtfully. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Grimwald. Lorelei felt the courtroom's energy shift. Whispers began in the gallery. She could feel doubt creeping into the jurors' expressions. Grimwald pressed his advantage. Miss Drackthorne, if you've truly lost your leg as you claim, you wouldn't mind providing proof to this court, would you? The courtroom fell completely silent. Lorelei stared at Grimwald, then at Judge Aldrichson, who was watching with undisguised interest. Your Honor, Blackthorne objected, this is highly irregular and potentially traumatic for the witness. I think it's a reasonable request, Aldrichson replied. If Ms. Drackthorne is claiming injuries that form the basis of this lawsuit, the court has a right to verify those claims. Lorelei looked out at the packed courtroom. In the gallery, she could see veterans who had come to support her, journalists with cameras ready, and the families of soldiers who had died. Her daughter Cassandra sat in the back row, her face pale with concern. Ms. Drackthorne, Judge Aldrichson said, his voice carrying a note of theatrical authority, are you willing to provide evidence of your claimed amputation? Lorelei's hands moved to her military jacket. Instead of answering verbally, she began removing it slowly, her movements deliberate and precise. The courtroom watched in absolute silence. With her jacket removed, Lorelei began rolling up her left pant leg. The prosthetic became visible first, carbon fibre and titanium where flesh and bone should have been. But she didn't stop there. Lorelei reached down and began unfastening the prosthetic leg itself. The mechanical clicks and releases echoed through the silent courtroom like gunshots. Judge Aldrichson's smug expression began to falter as Lorelei lifted the prosthetic leg free, revealing the scarred stump beneath. The extensive surgical scars, the pins and metal plates visible beneath the skin, told a story of trauma and countless medical procedures. This is what an IED does when your body armor fails, Lorelei said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room. She held the prosthetic leg in her hands like evidence in a trial. This is what 17 families will never get back. The courtroom was tomb quiet. Several jurors had tears in their eyes. Judge Aldrichson's face had gone ashen, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Lorelei continued, her voice growing stronger. March 15th, 2019. The blast happened at 13:47 hours. I was providing medical aid to Corporal Vexarius Nightfall when the secondary explosion hit. The shrapnel came through my body armor like it was paper. I stayed conscious long enough to treat 2 other wounded soldiers before losing consciousness from blood loss. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Corporal Nightfall died. So did Sergeant Mordian Vex and Private Zethrian Kane. They were 22, 24, and 19 years old. Their body armor failed just like mine, but they weren't as lucky. Judge Aldrichson cleared his throat, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. Miss Drackthorne, you may replace your prosthetic. As Lyrelei began reattaching her leg, Prosecutor Blackthorne approached with a folder. Your Honour, I'd like to submit additional evidence. These are the classified after-action reports from March 15th, 2019. She handed copies to the judge and defence table. As Aldrichson read, his face grew increasingly pale. This report, Blackthorne announced to the jury, shows that Staff Sergeant Drackthorne continued providing medical care to wounded soldiers for 17 minutes after losing her leg. She saved the lives of 2 soldiers while bleeding out herself. Grimwald, the defence attorney, looked stricken as he read the same report. His aggressive posture crumbled. Blackthorne continued, The report also shows that this was the 7th incident of Vanguard body armor failing catastrophically. Each time, the company claimed it was due to unprecedented explosive force. Each time, soldiers died. Judge Aldrichson set down the report with shaking hands. Court will recess for 15 minutes, he said, his voice barely audible. As Lyrelei finished reattaching her prosthetic, the courtroom began to stir. In the gallery, the veterans who had come to support her stood at attention. One by one, other observers rose as well, until the entire courtroom was standing in silent respect. Lyrelei gathered her jacket and walked toward the gallery, her slight limp now explained to everyone present. As she passed the defence table, Grimwald looked up at her. Ma'am, he said quietly, I apologise. That was wrong of me. Lyrelei paused. Mr. Grimwald, you were doing your job, but 17 families deserve better than legal tactics. When court reconvened, Judge Aldrichson looked like a different man. Gone was the theatrical arrogance, replaced by something approaching humility. Before we continue, Aldrichson said, I want to apologise to Miss Drackthorne for the treatment she received in this courtroom. Your service and sacrifice deserve better. He paused, composing himself. I also want to note for the record that this court recognises Staff Sergeant Drackthorne by her proper military rank. The rest of Lyrelei's testimony proceeded without interruption. She detailed the technical failures of the body armour, the pattern of defects Vanguard had ignored, and the impact on her unit. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the jury box. During closing arguments, Defence Attorney Grimwald's heart clearly wasn't in his presentation. The evidence Lyrelei had provided, both testimonial and physical, had devastated his case. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with the verdict. In the matter of Drackthorne versus Vanguard Defence Systems, we find for the plaintiff on all counts. We award damages in the amount of $15 million, plus punitive damages of $50 million. The courtroom erupted in cheers from the veteran advocates in the gallery. Lyrelei sat quietly, feeling not triumph, but relief. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Lyrelei as she emerged into the Colorado sunshine. Cameras flashed and questions came from all directions. Staff Sergeant Drackthorne, how do you feel about the verdict? Lyrelei paused on the courthouse steps, leaning slightly on the railing. This was never about money, she said, her voice carrying clearly. This was about accountability. 17 soldiers died because a company chose profits over protection. Today, a jury said that's not acceptable. What will you do with the award money? Another reporter called. It will go toward a foundation for wounded veterans and military families. That money is blood money. It should be used to help people, not enrich me. As the questions continued, Lyrelei noticed Judge Aldrichson emerging from a side exit. He walked slowly toward her, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Staff Sergeant, he said, approaching carefully. Might I have a word? Lyrelei nodded, stepping away from the reporters. Aldrichson's voice was quiet, meant only for her. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an explanation. He paused, struggling with his words. I've spent 20 years on the bench thinking I was protecting the system from fraud. Today I realized I was protecting the wrong people. Lorelei studied his face. Judge Aldrichson, we all make mistakes. Not like this, he replied. What you showed in that courtroom today, your courage, your sacrifice, it changed something in me. I want you to know that I'm recusing myself from all future military contractor cases. Someone else should handle them, someone who understands what service really means. Lorelei extended her hand. Thank you for saying that. As Aldrichson walked away, Lorelei's daughter Cassandra appeared at her side. Mom, I'm proud of you, Cassandra said, wrapping her arms around Lorelei's waist. Mia, what I did in there, showing my leg, talking about that day, it wasn't easy. But sometimes we have to show people the truth, even when it hurts. Lorelei looked back at the courthouse, where the American flag flew against the bright Colorado sky. She thought about Corporal Nightfall, Sergeant Vex, and Private Kane. About the other veterans who would benefit from today's verdict. About the future soldiers whose lives might be saved because a jury had said, enough. 6 months later, Lorelei stood before a different kind of audience. The Lorelei Drackthorne Foundation for Wounded Veterans was being officially launched at Walter Reed Medical Center. The ballroom was filled with wounded warriors, their families, and supporters. Lorelei approached the podium, walking confidently on her prosthetic leg. She had learned to embrace what made her different, what made her story powerful. When I lost my leg in Afghanistan, she began, I thought my story was ending. I couldn't have imagined that it was actually beginning. She looked out at the audience, seeing young soldiers in wheelchairs, veterans with prosthetics, families dealing with invisible wounds. Each of us carries scars, some visible, some hidden, but our scars don't define our limits. They define our strength. They tell the world what we've survived, what we've overcome, what we're capable of achieving. The applause was thunderous, but Lorelei raised her hand for quiet. This foundation exists because sometimes we have to show our scars to change the world. Sometimes we have to stand up in courtrooms and boardrooms and say, this is what your decisions cost. This is what accountability looks like. After the ceremony, Lorelei walked alone through the hospital corridors, visiting wounded soldiers. In each room, she saw herself at different stages of recovery. The fear, the anger, the slow acceptance, and finally the determination to rebuild. In the prosthetics ward, she met a young Marine who had lost both legs in an IED attack just 3 months earlier. Staff Sergeant, he called out as she passed his room. I saw you on the news, about the courtroom thing. Lorelei stopped and entered his room. How are you doing, Marine? Honestly, pretty scared. This thing, he gestured to his prosthetics, it's not what I planned for my life. Lorelei sat down beside his bed. None of us planned for this, but let me tell you something. That prosthetic isn't a limitation. It's proof of what you survived. It's evidence of your strength. The young Marine looked at her with new hope in his eyes. Will I ever be normal again? Lorelei smiled. Marine, normal is overrated. You'll be something better. You'll be unstoppable. As she prepared to leave, the Marine called out again. Staff Sergeant, thank you, not just for today, but for showing everyone what we go through, for making them see. Lorelei nodded. That's what we do for each other. We show up, we tell the truth, we make them see. Walking back through the hospital corridors, Lorelei reflected on how much had changed since that day in the Denver courthouse. Judge Aldrichson had indeed recused himself from military cases and had begun volunteering with veteran organizations. The Vanguard verdict had triggered congressional hearings and new oversight of military contractors. Most importantly, the safety standards for body armor had been completely overhauled, but perhaps the most significant change was in Lorelei herself. For years after losing her leg, she had tried to hide her prosthetic, to minimize her disability, to appear normal. The courtroom had taught her that her scars weren't something to hide, they were something to honor. They were proof of service, evidence of sacrifice, and tools for change. As Lorelei stepped out into the Washington sunshine, she walked with confidence, her slight limp no longer a source of shame, but a badge of honor. Behind her, the hospital bustled with activity, doctors saving lives, therapists rebuilding bodies, families learning to hope again. It was a good day's work, but there was more to do. more battles to fight, more truths to tell. Lorelei Drackthorne, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, walked toward her next mission, carrying her scars proudly and her purpose clearly. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply showing people what courage looks like. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's truth changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. Remember to subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things and the moments when justice finally arrives.